Namaste. This is a set of poses that does a lot of work on the muscles of the legs, particularly the quadriceps. But we're going to start as we always do, just by tuning into our breath as we move inward, thinking about our yoga practice. We're going to press our hands into our surface and stretch our spine as tall as we can. And then bring our hands to a comfortable position, either just resting on our legs, maybe using one of the yoga mudras, hand gestures, joining our index finger and our thumb together. Helps us with our concentration. We can put one palm on top of the other, bringing our thumbs together. And we're noticing that we're working with our breath and our diaphragm. That Durga Pranayama, so that our belly's moving out on our inhale. We feel the rib cage opening and lifting, and lastly the chest. And then as we exhale, the chest starts collapsing, the rib cage tightens, and the belly moves back toward the spine. We can imagine this as an ocean wave coming in from the flat surface and starting to rise at our belly, lifting tall as we get to our rib cage, opening wide, stretching high, and then curling and foaming as we get to our chest before that wave rolls back down under the next incoming wave. And as we pay attention to that movement, we notice that some breaths are shorter, some are longer, some are deeper, some are more shallow. We're not at all concerned about controlling the breath, just paying attention to it, so that we're getting rid of all those frustrations, concerns, cares, worries, fears, sorrows that we're carrying around, and just tuning in to how we feel at this moment, recognizing this moment as a gift that can never come again. On our next inhale, let's start our warm-up by slowly lifting our chin up to the sky as high as we'd like, and then on our exhale, dropping it back down. So if that neck is really stiff or sore today, we can just do a minimal lift. Otherwise, we'll come as high as we can without compressing the cervical spine. Just trying to get the stiffness out of our neck or upper shoulders. And the next time we lift the chin, we're going to lift the shoulders straight up as well, a nice high shrug. And then as we slowly lower the chin to the ground, we're going to drop those shoulders as low as we can. Continuing to move with our breath, taking a range of motion that allows us to feel as though we're working the muscles without strain, without pain. And then sitting up tall, imagining little tykes on either shoulder, going into our teeter-totter, lifting one shoulder, dropping it, lifting the other. Making sure as we do so that we're not tilting and moving at all through the waist, that our spine stays perpendicular to the floor, nice and tall and straight. It's just a stretching of muscles like the trapezius, latissimus dorsi, shoulder blades pulling away from the spine so the rhomboids are stretching out. And then working a bit more on the shoulders. Let's bring our hands to our heart center, our Anjali Mudra. And following our fingertips, we're going to press hard to the palms. Stretch our arms high to the sky. Then open them out, abducting them to the side as we externally rotate the arms, palms down to internally rotate, bringing the hands together, and then slowly pushing again. As tightly as we can get those palms together, the more we're going to do on building up strength in the forearms and the hand itself. the next time we bring our hands on, we're going to imagine ourselves as a tree blowing in the wind, leaning out to one side, maybe opening our fingers wide and then making a fist as we come back so we get out the stiffness from our hands and going swaying from side to side. Deep breath in as we come and get tall to the sky, and then a nice slow exhale as we lean and bend to the side. And then sitting up nice and tall, working on getting the tenseness out of our back, our hips and shoulders, doing a spinal twist. So we're going to pulse on our hip, rotate through the rib cage, and then around through the shoulders to the side, come back to center. And let's stay on this side, making sure we do the corkscrew motion from the lowest part of the torso, moving through the rib cage, then the shoulders, back to center. Again, hip, rib cage, shoulders. We'll switch to the opposite side. Balancing in yoga is not just standing on one leg or putting our weight on our arms, but making sure that we do everything equally on both sides. And coming back to center, we're going to loosen a bit through the hips. So we're going to lean out to one side, come forward, around to the side, and then back as far as we can. Just trying to loosen up through that hip area. Lower back, we'll switch direction. If we only want to do a little bit of a circle, that's fine. If we want to come so that we're almost bringing our rib cage down toward our thighs, we can do that as well. Then we're going to loosen up more through the legs by coming to all fours. And doing our cat and cow, starting with a nice neutral back, hands directly underneath our shoulders, knees underneath our hips. We want to roll like a wave from the lowest part of the spine up through the neck, so we push the tailbone down, we lift with the belly, we lift with the rib cage, we stretch as high as we can before we drop chin into chest. And then we start with the tailbone again. The belly drops down to the ground. We drop the rib cage. We pull the shoulder blades tight together before we lift the head in front. And rolling from the lowest part of the spine, coming up, up, up as high as we can, chin into chest, and then dropping. Sacral, lumbar, thoracic, cervical spine. Sacral, lumbar, thoracic, cervical spine. We have arthritis in the back, lower back pain. This is a really good exercise to alleviate those. And then we're going into our sunbird to loosen up through the knee and the hip. So we're going to stretch our leg as far as we can behind us, pushing through the heel, and we're going to curl our knee in toward our chest, rolling head toward knee. Deep breath in, stretching our leg behind us, lifting our head, curling into a ball, stretching forward and back. And then shifting to the other side. Same thing again, lifting our leg, pulling knee into chest, working with our breath. Exhaling, inhaling. And then we're going into our spinal balance. So we're going to move with our breath still warming up. We're going to lift one leg, again flexing the foot, trying to lift it even with our hip if we can. Opposite arm coming straight forward. Dropping that hand to the ground, switching to the opposite side. Trying to get our body as long as we can, fingertip to heel. And now, if we'd like, we can hold the pose to give us more work through our core muscles, the abdominals, the glutes, the obliques. Or we can keep moving with our breath if we're feeling a little fatigued today, don't want to put all that weight on our arms or shoulders. We have the option always of moving. We adjust every pose as we feel on any particular day. And now we're going to do a little bit more of working muscles on the side. So we're going into our spider. We're going to lift our hand out to the side this time, foot in the opposite direction. And let's just switch from side to side. Moving with the right hand lifted, left leg, and then right leg, left hand. Again, we're going to hold the pose if we'd like, or we can keep moving with our breath. We're trying to get that hand even with our shoulder. Foot as far forward as we can. And then to the opposite side. Arm out to the side, even with our shoulder. Lifting that leg. And then coming down. We're going to work a bit more on stretching the quad by keeping our hands underneath our shoulders. We're going to lift one leg behind us, bend at the knee, heel up to the sky. We're going to curl into a ball for a minute so we can hold onto that foot around the ankle or whatever we can grab onto, and we're going to lift that leg behind us. Slowly dropping it to the floor and switching to the opposite side. So bending that leg up, curling into a ball so we can reach around, grab onto that ankle or that foot as we need to, lifting that leg. Trying to line up the heel with our sit bone, our knee directly underneath the hip, and then dropping that foot to the floor. Loosening out through the wrist by taking a palm of the hand up toward the sky, fingers in toward our leg. We're going to drop it down on the ground. Flatten out fingers as much as we can, palm as flat as we can get it to the floor. And then switch to the opposite hand. And then planting both hands on the ground. We're going to go into our down dog. So our hands are going to come forward at least one hand length in front of our shoulders, fingers wide spread, our starfish hands. We think about rolling chin into chest, dropping belly down as the tailbone comes up to the sky. We're going to turn our toes under, lift our knees, and then we're going to drive backward. We're thinking about moving our heart toward our knees, our shoulders down toward our toes so we don't have a bend through the shoulder area. We've got a straight line from our hands all the way back to our tailbone. We're going to keep one foot pushing through the heel, lifting the other leg as high as we'd like without twisting through the hips or the shoulders. So we're actively working on keeping the shoulders even. Then we're going to pull that knee in toward our chest and come forward into a plank, pushing the tailbone down. And then we're going to drop that foot to the floor, knee to the floor, and we're going to take this to a modified pigeon. So we're going to keep that leg that's bent on the floor and straight forward rather than trying to turn it. We're just going to push backward as far as we can with the opposite leg, wiggling it back, and then leaning forward, bringing our forearms, maybe our head down toward our knee, or keeping it lifted. And just settling into that stretch across the quad, pushing back with the long leg a little further, but making sure that we keep the hips even, that we're not rolling from one side to the other. Now we're going to slide our hands back, bring our knees together so that we can kneel up tall and come into our camel pose. We can start with our hands as fists on the back of our hips, or we can put palms against our kidneys. But we're going to make sure that we don't pull the hips back toward our feet, that we keep them lined up as much as possible over the knees so that we're working the back, not the legs. We push the tailbone forward. We pull the iliac crest, that bony part of our hips, up and move it back in the direction our shoulder's going. We're going for length through the front of the body, working from our pubic bone, zipping up to our belly button, and up to our solar plexus, up to our heart. We're watching the bend in the neck. If we'd like to, we can let our hands come to the backs of our thighs, down to our calves. Or if we can do so without pulling the hips back, reach for our heels, that would be fine. But if that means we lose the alignment of hips and knees, we want to stay hands higher. Now we're going to come forward, plant our hands on the floor so we can stretch our leg forward and come into our half pyramid, working on stretching through the hamstring, tightening the muscles of the quadriceps, so we're building up strength there. We're going to lower our belly as low as we can in toward that leg. When we want to stretch more through the shoulders, we're going to slowly walk our hands out toward our foot. And we're going to walk our hands back. Slide that foot till it's flat on the floor, but a little bit in front of our knee. And we're going to come up and kneel up and again work on the stretch for the quadricep by pushing our hips forward, coming into our crescent lunge. So we might want to wiggle that front foot, balancing foot a little further forward so we can maximize the stretch through the leg. We're lining up our midline with the inside of that front leg. We can take our hands on our back, stretch upward as we did in our camel, or bring our arms up and out to the side. And we'll bring our arms around down to the floor. Bring our knees together so we can come back into another down dog. So belly drops, tailbone high to the sky, chin into chest, lifting knees. Thinking about the length down the back without any bend through the shoulders. So we're pushing the tailbone high. We're thinking about shoulders moving toward our toes. We're thinking about pressing through the pads of the fingers on the first knuckle so we have the weight off our wrists. We're going to lift that same leg into our Ekapada Adho Mukha Svanasana, our one-legged down dog. Then we're going to externally rotate that leg, making sure that we're not twisting through the spine, that we're not lifting that hip any higher. We're going to bring the knee out to the side, the foot behind our other hip, still pushing back. Now we're going to swing that leg forward all the way to the floor, behind the hand. We're going to drop our other knee behind our ankle, and we're going to see if we can leverage a little more turn of that front leg out to the side so we're getting more of an external rotation. We're going to slowly straighten out again. We did the modified pigeon before, now we're going into the full pigeon. We're keeping our hips even with each other, making sure that we're not rocking from to the bent leg side, straight leg side, but straight, even hips, slowly coming down. The tighter we can get our abdominals down to the floor, the lower we can put our torso, the more we're going to get that piriformis stretch, the one that lies on top of the sciatic nerve. So we try to lower our entire torso into the floor. We might be able to drop our head to the floor. We might want to make fist over fist, let our head rest on our fist, or put our hands side to side. We can straighten out our arms, but many of us are going to end up starting to twist to one side or the other if we don't have our forearms on the floor, so we're going to be careful if we do stretch longer, that we maintain the levelness of the hip. And keeping the hips even, we're going to bring our hands back, so we're going to take that hand with the long leg and bring it over in front of our opposite knee. Our other hand's going to come out to the side, making a 90-degree angle with the arm. We're going into a twist without dropping the long leg hip. We're just pulsing on that hip and sliding the belly across, twisting through the rib cage, straightening out that arm as we lift that top shoulder as far as we can behind us. And then we're going to rotate toward center. Bring our hands back as close as we can in toward our midline. We can either make a fist with our hand or keep the hand wide. We're going to pick up our back leg, pull it in toward our sit bone, rotate around to the side, and then reach around for that leg. We can hold on maybe at the ankle. Ideally, if we can, putting the palm of our hand on top of our foot and slowly bringing it closer and closer in toward that sit bone so that we're increasing that stretch through the quad. And then slowly dropping that foot to the floor. Rotating around to the front, bringing our knees together. If we're feeling any tension in our wrist, we can do some wrist circles, because now we're going to do all those poses on the opposite side. So starting with our down dog. Belly drops, toes turn under. We lift and push back. Into our one-legged again, opposite leg. Still pushing the shoulders back, down toward our toes, toward our knees. And now we're going to take this to a plank, so we're going to bend the lifted leg, pull it in toward our chest, bring our shoulders forward over our hands, shoulder blades pulling in tight, down toward our waistline. And then we're going to drop that knee to the floor into our modified plank by keeping that leg straight, but sliding the other leg back as far as we can get it. And then dropping down so that we're resting our rib cage on top of this thigh. Getting a good stretch through the back of the hip, through the hamstring. Coming as low as we'd like. And then walking our hands back. We're going to come into our camel by sliding our knees together, kneeling up tall. And again, thinking about the fact that we want to keep the alignment of hips and knees. So we do our back bend, going more for height of the heart up toward the sky. And then again, deciding, can we reach lower with our hands without compromising and losing the alignment that we want through the hips? We can turn our toes under, lift our heels a little higher so that we can reach a little better. And then releasing. Bringing our leg forward so that we can come into our half pyramid. Getting it as straight as we can before we start lowering down into that leg, tightening through the abdominals. We're going to stay as tall as we need to, but if we can get the rib cage down toward our leg, that would be great. And once we feel we've gotten to a comfortable stretch, then we can walk our hands further forward so that we're getting more of a stretch through the muscles of the back, particularly the lats again, trapezius. Bringing our hands back underneath our shoulders, sliding that foot back, coming into our crescent lunge again. So we might want this foot a little bit further forward so we can really push those hips straight forward and still keep the knee and ankle in alignment. But we're trying to maximize the stretch on that quadricep on the back leg. And then we can take this to our crescent lunge, working on the back by pushing belly forward, rib cage forward, heart up to the sky. If we like, arms out and up. And then releasing and coming forward. Hands to the floor. Lining up hand with the middle of the finger to the middle of the shoulder. Knees directly underneath our sit bones. Into another down dog. Concentrating on our breathing. And making sure that we keep the shoulders parallel to the floor, hips parallel to the floor. Going into our one-legged again, lifting that heel, pressing through the heel of the supporting leg, pressing through the shoulders, and then externally rotating. Knee out to the side without twisting the back at all, foot coming behind our hip. Before we swing it down to the floor, drop the other leg behind, knee behind ankle, so we can see if we can get more of a turn, more of an external rotation before we slide back and back and back. Trying to get belly as low as we can down into the ground, making sure they're not all rolling over toward the bent leg or the long leg, but keeping the sit bones same distance from the floor on either side. Trying to lower rib cage, shoulders lower and lower into the ground. The more we can do that, the more we're going to get that stretch on the muscles on the back of that bent leg. Gluteus maximus, the big one on the outside, but underneath we have ones like the gemellus, obturators. But the piriformis is the one we're most trying to stretch now. And then taking this to a twist. We're going to bring one hand across the front of our body, out toward the bent leg, Our other hand's going to come flat on the floor, 90-degree angle with that arm. We're going to pulse on the hip of the long leg. We're going to rotate through the belly, the rib cage, heart, coming around and turning to our twist to the side. And then coming back to our center. We're going to come up as tall as we can. We're going to lift our back leg, pull it as tight as we can into the sit bone, bringing our hand as tight as we can to our midline and rotating around. And again, the grip of choice. If we're just barely reaching that leg, maybe just putting our fingers on the side of the leg, that will work. If we can hold onto the ankle or any part of the foot, that would work. But we'd like to maximize the bend, the pull forward, by bringing our hand to the top of our foot and slowly, gently bringing that heel closer and closer in toward our tailbone. And then dropping that foot. Bringing our knees together. Doing a little bit of cat and cow. Extending upward. Sacral-lumbar thoracic vertebra. Now we're going to get ready to come into a down dog so that we can come into standing poses, building up more strength in the ankles, knees, and hips, building up our bone density. So we turn the toes under. Again, we watch the alignment, the middle of the heels lining up with our sit bone, middle of the fingers lining up with our shoulders. We're making sure that our feet aren't so far back that we can't pick up our toes. We don't want to be up on our toes, because we want to work and stretch the muscles through the back of the heel, the calf muscle, gastric nerve, the tibialis soleus on the sides of the ankle, the Achilles tendon on the back of the heel. And now we're going to swing our leg forward and getting ready to come into our warrior two. So we're going to plant that foot flat on the floor. Our back heel is going to be planted on the ground as well. We're going to walk our hands around to the side. And once we line up our shoulders with the long side of our mat, we're going to tighten our pelvic floor, use our abdominal strength, and come up and stand up tall. We're going to make sure that both feet are planted on the ground. We might want to rock back and forth a little bit so that we feel comfort through the ankles, knees, and hips. But then we're going to extend our arms forward and back in our warrior two. Stretching as hard as we can, fingertip to fingertip, so that we can feel the work being done through the arms at the same time we're working on legs. Stretching the front side of our body, coming into our reverse warrior, hand down, other hand high, going for height before we lean over backward. And then our Parsvakonasana. Coming forward, forearm resting on our thigh, making sure that the knee and ankle are in alignment, that we've not pulled that knee out to the side. Getting a straight line now, making sure we're not dropping low, but keeping shoulder, hip, foot in a straight line before we bring our top arm up and around. Then we're going to take this to a twist. So we're going to rotate and turn toward the front so our midline's lining up with our front leg. We're going to hinge forward so we can put that hand down on the floor. And then we're going to press hard into that back leg, tighten the muscles on the side of the hips, slide the belly across the bent leg, turn as far as we can around to the side. And once we get that top shoulder pulled back, we can lift that hand upward. Trying to make a straight line from shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand. Slowly coming down. We're going to bring both hands to the inside of that front foot. We're going to take the outside hand, make a fist with it, and pull as if we were an archer, bringing that hand up to our shoulder, elbow straight up to the sky. And then bringing that hand behind our back. Dropping it as low as we can down toward the floor. behind our hip, outside our thigh. And if we want to take this to a bound warrior, keeping our front shoulder low, taking our other hand and bringing it underneath our leg. Maybe our fingers can touch, maybe our hand's going to be further away from the other hand. And now we're going into our triangle. So front hands on the floor, underneath our shoulder, we're going to push the hips back as far as we can, straightening the leg, keeping shoulder stacked over shoulder, then taking that top hand up to the sky. And then bringing that hand down, taking this to our balancing half moon, Ardha Chandrasana. We're going to shift our weight forward onto our front leg. We're going to take that same hand and bring it forward, out to the side, and give ourselves a test. If we lift that back leg, will we feel balanced? If that's the case, then we're going to lift that leg, and if and when we're ready, lifting the top hand. We're going to rotate around to the front. Drop that foot to the floor. Both hands to the floor, bending our knees, stepping back, and coming into a down dog so we can do all those poses on the opposite side. You can stay here and bring the opposite leg forward just for making sure that I'm facing toward the camera. I'm going to come around so that I'm in the opposite direction before we move into our warrior two. Distance between the legs as we plant them is not nearly as important as stability. We'd like a good bend in that front knee, but if it's straighter, that's okay. We're going to walk our hands to the side, and then we're going to use our core strength and come up and stand up tall. And again, if we want to do a little bit of rocking, but we always make sure that we can always see that big toe. We never push that knee so far forward that we're causing any strain on the front of the knee. Settling in, arms forward and back, pushing as hard as we can, fingertip to fingertip. Reversing. Seeing if we can drop the hips a little lower, bend a little further. Parsvakonasana. Straight line down the side. Pushing through fingertips. We're trying to get a maximized stretch so it's heel tight to the floor, fingertips high to the sky. Hand down as we rotate to the front, our revolved warrior. Making sure that we start that twist to the lowest part of the torso, working on getting that top shoulder pulling back before we lift the hand up to the sky. Heel flat on the floor. If not, we're going to shift it closer. We're going to come back around, both hands on the inside of that front foot, making a fist with that hand. Our archer pull back so our shoulders are stacking over each other. And bringing that hand behind our back, pushing it as low as we can into the ground before we lift that front hand and bring it under our leg. Maybe joining the hands together, maybe not. Our bound warrior. Into our triangle. Hand to the floor, pushing hips back, getting our front leg as straight as we can, trying to maximize that stretch through the hamstring. Feeling stability here, keeping shoulders turned, top shoulder directly over the bottom shoulder before we lift our hand. Using our core strength, keeping our spine parallel to the floor. And then into our Ardha Chandrasana. So bending our front leg just so we can shift our weight forward, bringing our front hand out where it needs to be for our balancing position. Once we find that, lifting the leg, lifting the hand. And then slowly lowering that foot to the floor, rotating around so we can come into yet another down dog. Thinking about the stretch of the back through the heels of the feet by pressing heels low to the ground, but not up on our toes. Pressing the heart back toward our toes so we don't have those shoulders forward, that we're losing the stretch we want all the way down the back. We're going to step our feet a little wider apart so that we're in a wide-legged down dog. Then we're going to drop our knees to the floor, stretching on the thighs again. So we're going to turn our toes toward the outside, checking to make sure that we're not feeling any pain in the inner knee if we do that. Then we're going to drop down on our forearms. And again, checking what's going on with the knees if need be. We're going to pull our legs closer together or straighten our feet out. And then we'll slowly drop our hips lower and lower and lower, down toward the floor. Getting more of a stretch through the quad, through the muscles on the outside of the thigh as well. Then we're going to come up on our knees. We're going to swing both feet around to the side so we can drop down on our hip. Straighten out one leg. We're going to continue to work the muscles of the leg by flexing that foot as much as we can. We're going to take our hand to our opposite foot, lift that foot off the floor and keeping it as straight as we can, going into our archer pose, pulling it back. So we're trying to get a stretch through the hamstring. We're tightening and strengthening the quad by going back as far as we can. We're keeping our midline lining up with the inside of our front leg. If we want to reach our hand forward, we can, but not with a twist through the spine. We can take both hands to our leg to try and pull back further. Now we're going to keep holding on to this foot. If we have short arms, long legs, we can always use a band, but we're going to straighten out that leg, maybe keeping the knee somewhat bent, but if we can, straightening the leg entirely. Keeping the spine nice and straight by doing that scapular retraction and depression in toward our spine, down toward our waistline. And then continuing to hold on to that foot, maybe on the back of the leg, maybe on the calf, but if we can, still holding onto the foot or using a band, we're going to slowly swing that foot out. So we're stretching inner thigh muscles, building up strength on the outer leg, and bringing that foot back. We're going to change hands so we can adduct and bring it across over the top of our other leg, our stabilizing leg, as far over as we can to the outside of the opposite hip. If our legs are just barely crossing, that's fine. We do what we can. We use our common sense, not our pride, to determine how deeply we go into a pose, paying attention to how the pose feels. We're going to come back and make sure we're sitting up tall, which probably means the front leg drops a little lower, our arm comes more parallel to the floor. We're going to take this to a twist, rotating belly, rib cage, heart, bringing our hand behind us, not so far back that we have to lean back, so our spine's perpendicular to the floor. If we'd like, we can lift that arm behind us. And then rotating toward the front. We're going to bend our front knee, take ourselves to cradle the baby so we can continue to hold on to that foot, wrap our other hand around the outside, rock the baby in the cradle. If we want to, we can just hold on around the ankle with both hands. Or if we feel we can do so without strain, we can pull that foot tighter and tighter in. We can bring our opposite hand to the outside of the leg and really tighten up. That same piriform stretch again. We can bring that foot, put it in the crook of our ankle, and bring the opposite arm around. Then we're going into our half lotus by gently dropping that leg on top of our straight leg. Ankle resting on top of our thigh as close to our groin as we can get it. Work the muscles on the outside of the bent leg so that we can get the knee closer to the floor. Making sure we're not straining through the knee. Still keeping that front foot flexed, sitting up tall. We're going to take this to a twist, holding out to our bent leg, rotating out toward the bent leg, by pulsing through the hip, going through the rib cage, through the shoulder, taking our other arm, reaching it behind us, and see if we can reach all the way over to the opposite arm. Turning and looking out over our back shoulder. And we're going to rotate slowly toward the front. Drop that foot all the way to the floor, but still keeping that external rotation, still keeping it bent. We might want that foot fairly close to our ankle. We want to bring it further to the side, but ideally we're going to bring it as close as we can in toward our pubic bone. Still working the muscles of the leg to keep the knee as low as we can, flexing through the foot, lining up our midline with the inside of the front leg. We're going to do that pelvic tilt that brings our belly down toward our leg first. We try to get lowest part of the torso down toward our leg before we start working on bringing the hands further forward. As we do so, again, we're stretching the muscles of like the trapezius that goes from our neck to our shoulders, halfway down our spine. Latissimus dorsi hooks lower on the spine, comes all the way up to the inside of the upper arm bone. So those muscles get a good stretch. The further forward we can reach. Some of us may never be able to reach our toes. Our legs are too long, our arms are too short. Some of us may be wanting just to hold on to the sides of our legs to keep our hands landed on the floor. We never want the arms up in space, however, because that puts too much strain on the lower back. If we can reach our toes, that's great, but we're not forcing ourselves to go there. And then slowly sitting up. We're going to rotate around toward our bent leg again, so we pulse on that straight leg hip. We rotate through the belly, the rib cage. We come around, bring our hand behind us as far as we can, lining up our shoulders as much as possible with the long leg. So we actively work the muscles on the back of that upper shoulder to get the turn through the shoulder, not letting it collapse forward. Now we're going to work on stretching muscles on the side by taking our front hand, palm up, just letting it lie on the inside of our front leg. We're going to bring our other hand straight to the sky. And then we're just going to merely lean out toward our long leg, bringing our shoulder up toward our knee. Our top hand is just going to stretch as far as it can. We're careful that we don't start twisting and dropping that shoulder. We're concerned about keeping shoulders stacked. We can bring that hand to rest on our shoulder if we're feeling strain at all. Some of us may feel comfortable enough to bring that hand all the way down to our opposite foot. But we're going to keep that elbow lifted, shoulder lifted, turning and looking out over that arm. And then slowly sitting up. Straightening out both legs, maybe lifting, lowering knees a little bit so that we can repeat all those poses on the opposite side. So we're going to start again with our archer. We're going to keep our legs straight. We're going to bend up our other leg, hold on as we'd like, maybe with both hands, maybe with one hand, but trying to pull it back as far as it'll go. Making sure we're not rounding through the shoulders, but we're trying to really stretch hamstring. And we're going to straighten out that leg. Bringing it up to the sky, back as straight as we can get it by thinking of the scapular retraction and depression. Lifting that leg slowly higher and higher so we're stretching more through the hamstring, maybe feeling the work being done around the knee. Yoga is exceptionally good because it works muscles above, below, inside, outside, front and back of the knee. And then we'll take this to our abduction, slowly bringing that leg out to the side. Adducting by changing hands. And again, if we want to be holding on to the back of the leg rather than the foot, we can do that. But we're going to swing that leg as far as we can, so now we're stretching the muscles on the outside of the leg. We've got the tensor fasciae lata, we've got the sartorius. Those are getting a good stretch, but now we're working on strengthening the muscles on the inside. Back and sitting tall. Making sure our spine's 90-degree angle before we start our twist out to the side. Hand can rest on the floor for support, or we can bring that hand even with our shoulder. And then slowly rotating toward the front, bending the front knee. Cradle the baby, so we can rock the baby in the cradle if that's our preference. Trying to bring the foot further over across our straight leg each time we do that. Or we can bring our arm forward and pull in tighter in toward our rib cage, maybe bringing that foot to rest in the crook of our arm. And then into our half lotus by swinging that leg so we've got it resting on top of our long leg, working muscles on the outside of the leg, the back of the hips to keep the knee as low as we can get it. Still flexing through the foot of the long leg. Before we take this to our twist, pulsing on the hip of the long leg, rotating out toward our bent leg, and bringing our other hand behind us, trying to bring it all the way over to the elbow of the opposite hand on the outside of our hip. And then rotating toward the front. Releasing that foot, bringing it all the way to the floor. Again, we'll adjust as the knee requires. We're thinking still about working the muscles of the leg to get the knee as low as we can to the floor, still flexing through this leg. We're going to take this to our forward fold, thinking first about getting the lowest part of the back as low as we can into our leg. Belly coming down. And once we get the low part settled, we're going to slowly walk our hands forward without making them float in space anywhere, keeping them on our leg, on our mat, reaching maybe toward our foot or not, but making sure that we take our time, enjoy the journey. And then slowly sitting up. Going into another twist, pulsing on the hip of the long leg, rotating belly, rib cage, heart, hand planted on the floor as much as we can so that the heel of the hand's lining up with this long leg. Maybe taking our opposite hand, gently pushing on that inner thigh so we can get the knee closer to the floor, getting more stretch through the groin area, across the lower abdominals, into the inner thigh muscles. And then front hand just rests on the inside of long leg. Opposite hand up to the sky, but if that shoulder's bothering us today, we can put hand on our shoulder. We're going to just lean over to the side, falling down so that our shoulders coming closer down toward our knee, our elbows coming closer to the floor. And then we can shoot that hand up and over the top. And again, being careful that we're not twisting at all. We're not letting that shoulder drop. And then sitting up nice and tall. We're going to plant both feet on the floor and go into our half boat, half lotus. So we'll come back to straightening out one leg, bending the other leg, just as we did in our half lotus. We're going to keep our spine as tall as we can, but then we're going to take our hands between our legs or on the outside and bending that knee, pulling that foot back, keeping our shoulder blades pulling into our spine, down toward our waistline. When and if we're ready, lifting that foot off the floor. Pulling as tight as we can forward, pulling our belly in toward our thigh, not our shoulders, toward our legs. And then dropping that foot to the floor, switching to the opposite side. So again, our half lotus, bringing that leg to rest as close as we can in toward our groin. We take our hand between our legs, other hand to the outside, we start bending that knee. We keep our shoulder blades as tight as we can. We pull back, pull back. We can just pick that foot off the floor, keeping the knee bent, or we can straighten out the leg. Pulling as tight as we can forward. And then slowly dropping that foot to the floor. We're going to roll down to the floor, keeping our knees bent. And do a little bit of windshield wipers. Just letting our knees rock side to side. Dropping both knees to the left. And turning and looking out over our right shoulder, making sure our right shoulder never leaves the floor. We're going to work a little bit harder on pulsing on the top hip and pushing the hips forward, working on the inner thigh muscles to get the knees tight together down toward the ground. Now we're going to think about working on that opposite shoulder, pushing it as low as we can into the floor, pulling that shoulder blade tighter toward our spine, maximizing the turn, and then coming back towards center. Planting our feet on the floor so we can switch to the opposite side. Our floor twisting poses are not really resting poses. We're still trying to maximize the turn, release toxins, bring fresh blood and oxygen to our internal organs. And then bring your knees back to center. We're going into our final relaxation. We can keep our knees bent, just widen our feet a little bit further apart. We can straighten out our knees. My preference, of course, is to do legs up the wall, Viparita Karate. Using the bolster gets my hips a little bit off the floor so that I have a true downward motion from my legs into my heart. If we're using nothing, if we're just down on the floor, then we've got that 90-degree angle. So using some kind of blanket, pillow, bolster, whatever we'd like to get the hips higher is very beneficial in making sure that flow is continually downward. Leaning back, bringing feet up to the sky, turning around so that I have my shoulders and my hips squared away with my feet. Arms resting comfortably to the side. And regardless of what position we've chosen, we're letting our jaw go slack, our eyes soft, tuning into our breath, letting our breath be the mechanism for getting rid of all those thoughts, all that chatter in our minds, all that activity of the left egocentric side of the brain. Using that breath to find that oneness, togetherness, the collage with everything in the world that the right side of the brain brings us. And whenever we're ready, we're going to pull our knees in toward our chest, gently rock side to side, before we roll over on our right side. Plant our hands on the floor and push ourselves up to a seated pose. Stretching high to the sky, palms to heart center. Namaste.